There are many different object relations we can assign to all of the items in our scene, including the objects, lights, and cameras. The first thing we're going to do is taking a look at parenting, or linking objects. I'm going to select our box in our scene. We just have a very basic scene right here where we have just a cube and a sphere. And I've just gone ahead and changed their materials to a red and a blue so we can pick them out a little bit easier. And we're just going to select this box, the cube, and we're going to go all the way to the right tab on top, and we can see the track and link to options. Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and link this to our sphere. And then I'm going to deselect our object and select our sphere. And what we'll notice is that as we move our sphere, our box is going along with it. So we can do any amount of manipulation to this object, and the other object will follow along. And that is our object linking. Now we can set this to control any part of the object that we want. So we're going to click back on our cube, and we can see that we can adjust, and we can select whether we want position, rotation, size, or join on. And I can turn off join. And if we rotate, now we can see that our objects are rotating independently. And then I can turn off position. So now if I move our object, our sphere, our cube will not move at all. But it will still link up to the size and our rotation because those items are still checked. And now we will be taking a look at tracking options. I'm going to select our cube again, and under tracking, I'm going to select sphere. We also notice that we get an error right now, and that's due to the fact that we also have it linked to that sphere. So I'm going to select no link. And we're going to go back to our cube and select our sphere again for tracking. And now if we move our sphere, you'll see that our box is tracking this object. So no matter where we move our sphere right now, a specific face of our cube will constantly be facing this object. So there's a lot of neat things you can do with this. It's great for object animation and even placing your objects. For an idea of object animation, you could set this to maybe a missile turret and have it tracking a ship or something that's flying past that missile turret. So it's a very cool way of manipulating our objects for both animation and still renders. And now there's one last thing we're going to be taking a look at, and that is pivot points. I'm going to go ahead and return to our 4 viewport, and I'm going to delete these objects out of the scene right now. And then I'm going to add a new sphere. Now, we're going to go to the upper right-hand part of our screen and click on the middle tab of the measuring ruler. We're going to go all the way down to the bottom and select our pivot point, which will allow us to move our pivot point. And now if we go ahead and we can just use these arrows to move around our section, we can see that our pivot point is moving. And you'll see in just a sec what this is actually going to do to our object. And we also want to show our pivot point, so we're going to go over to the right and turn that on so we can see it in our scene. And then if anytime we want to reset our pivot point and move it back to its original position, we can click this bottom button right here. So I'm going to deselect our object. I'm going to zoom back just a little, and reselect it. And now we are going to rotate. And as you can see, our rotation handle, gizmo, is actually around our pivot point now and not the actual object, and that's because this is determined where the pivot point is. And if we go ahead and rotate this now, you'll see that our object is rotating around this pivot point. So there's a lot more ways to manipulate objects in this method, especially for animation, because we can do things like having a planet or a moon rotate around a planet, or a planet around a sun, and all we'd have to do is move that pivot point into the center, and we'd be able to animate that. So we can do this for any object and actually move the pivot point around, and then it'll adjust our rotation from that pivot point, along with our scale as well. We'll also size up from that pivot point. So at this point we are scaling inward towards the pivot point or outward. And if the pivot point's in the center, it will of course size inward.